Disabled people of Reddit, what's something you do on purpose to mess with people? I have a friend whose mom has a plate in her head from a tumor she had when my friend was young. She used to sneeze at parties and drop a handful of tiny screws. Something she had a couple screws loose lol. Ooh, I have a plate in my head from a tumor too. I gotta start doing this. It's all fun and games until you sneeze out the plate. I used to take my prosthetic leg off, turn it around and wear it backwards in school to get out of lessons with a substitute teacher. They'd always look horrified when I said that I'd sprained my ankle though. The teachers caught on quickly enough once they mentioned it to other staff members though lol. Oh boy. My elbow overextends, meaning when I extend my arm out it bends the other way on my elbow. It would look like it's broken. In middle school we were little and would always stand up on the buses. The bus driver tells us to sit down several times and we wouldn't. Finally she starts tapping the brakes which would make us lunge a bit forward. So to scare her, I purposely stood up and make her tap the brakes so I lunged forward, pretend to slam my arm into the seat in front of me and extend my arm out and screamed my arm is broken. She stopped to the side of the road and I could see the fear in her eyes in the rearview mirror as she looked at me, asking if it was really broken. Man, I felt bad. I'm a wheelchair user but not a paraplegic. I also have restless leg syndrome, unrelated. People mention my leg moving in relation to my wheelchair a lot, like you can move your legs, so obviously you can walk. I put away my glasses, stand up, take a few steps and fall hard. My friend's father lost his leg just below the hip in a motorcycle accident and always wears a prosthetic. If you didn't know better, you'd think he just has a limp. Occasionally during Halloween he'll participate in the neighborhood haunted house. There was one year that he stuffed ground beef between his stump and the prosthetic and then shackled his prosthetic to the wall. When some kids wandered into his room of the haunted house he chopped through the ground beef with an axe and hopped toward them on one leg. They wet themselves. That reminds me of a story I was told by a reenactor. Someone he knew lost a leg to a misfiring cannon. They have a realistic prosthetic most of the time now. So they would arrange to be carried off the battlefield screaming and with their fake leg covered in fake blood, past the watching crowd and into the medical tent. Then the physician would drop the flaps on the tent and saw through a piece of wood while the guy screamed some more. Then they would open the tent and chuck the blood covered fake leg into a bucket, and the guy would hop out on a peg leg. Apparently people in the audience would faint. Yahweh, I finally get to tell this story. Not really something I've done multiple times but it still fits here. I have cerebral palsy which most noticeably affects lower limb function as well as upper limb function in a less visible manner. I can still walk short distances with crutches or a walker, but need to be pushed in a wheelchair for anything longer than say 25 meters in any case. A friend and I had been hanging around downtown with me in a wheelchair, having my crutches with me out of habit. When we were just about home I asked if he minded letting me walk for a bit, so I got out and toddled on with my crutches. Not having anything better to do with a wheelchair, my friend decides to get in and try some wheelies or whatever, generally just dicking around. I don't mind, so we went for worth of a reason we decide to cross the street. I struggle a bit but manage eventually. My able-bodied friend however, did not. In trying to get off the sidewalk, he keels over, presumably spectacularly as my back was turned and I didn't get to see this part, but he landed like a meter away from the wheelchair. Some people who had just come around the corner however did see the whole thing and rushed toward him to help. They had almost reached my friend when he simply, but swiftly, got up on his feet and started pushing what those people presumed was his own wheelchair, making his way toward me as nonchalantly as he could muster. Needless to say that was not something you'd expect to happen, and this surprise was plain to see on their face. I still remember the look, as I could barely hold in my laughter. The sidewalk of miracles. My uncle had a prosthetic leg after a car accident. He was a tough trucker who was in good shape and moved very well with his leg. One night he was at the bar when a younger guy who had too much whiskey was going off about how he was a big man and could fight anybody in the bar. My uncle was a funny man and thought he'd have some fun with this guy and told him, "I'll fight you." But I gotta get mad first. The guy gives him a funny look and watches my uncle calmly pull out a knife from his pocket and jerks and stabs it into his artificial leg and yells, "Now I'm mad." The guy proceeds to run away and say my uncle's nuts, while everyone who knows about his leg starts cracking up. He also was a good sport and let people throw darts at it if they were any good. He was a funny guy. We actually have had a lot of tragedy in my family, and my cousin, uncle, and grandfather all had artificial limbs related to traumatic events, and this uncle's daughter actually became paralyzed after a car accident. I feel like everyone in my family has a good sense of humor about all of it because we've been around it our whole lives. He placed his daughter in a bus stool once and someone knocked her out of it by accident, and instead of getting upset or embarrassed, she yells, "I can't feel my legs," then starts laughing when people look freaked. I had a blind guy come into the movie theater and ask for the closed caption glasses. I got them out and handed them to him before I realized he was messing with me. When people ask me how I lost my leg, there are a couple things I will do. One is to act confused, look to my leg and freak out as if I didn't know I was an amputee, screaming, "Oh my god, oh my fucking god, my leg, where's my leg?" Or I make up a totally bullshit story such as landmine, shark attack, bone-eating parasite, etc. And if they say I am making it up, I get very sad and look them in the eye and simply say, "How dare you?" After messing with folks, however, I always tell the truth of how I lost it afterwards, unless they were honestly really rude or generally people they don't. How do you lose your leg? I left it on the bus called the lost and found number, but they didn't have it. You're making that up. How dare you? I'm missing an arm and I have school-aged children, so I have to explain where my arm is every year. When I was younger, my go-to tale was that a huge turtle shark bit it off. Now I just enlist the children to help me search for it. Oh yeah, kids are the best audience for prosthetic stories. I used to spend a lot of time working with kids, and they get so into it. I had one group of kids I was working with, age 7-8, who I convinced that a lion ate it in Narnia, not Aslan, a different lion. Favorite story about my SOB uncle: he lost his leg above his knee years and years ago. Nowadays, the prosthetics are a bit more comfortable and can use suction to stay in place. Long time ago though, he'd have to wear a special belt and buckle his prosthetic to it. It was really uncomfortable. If he knew he was going to be sitting for a while, he'd unbuckle his leg to relieve some of the pressure. He'd usually sit on the outside of the table booth when going out to stretch it out a bit. He and my aunt were eating dinner at a diner in their small town, and there was an unruly small child running amok. Kid was running around, getting into things he shouldn't etc. And nobody did anything because small town diner. My uncle was getting irritated. So, from his spot on the outside of the booth, he stretches his leg a little further than normal, and sure enough the kid takes the bait. He comes over and kicks my uncle's leg, which flops like 90 degrees to the side, amid my uncle's fake screams of pain. Kid didn't bother anyone else that night. When I was in college, I shared a few classes with a guy who was severely disabled. I don't remember what the nature of his disability was exactly, but he was confined to a wheelchair with very limited use of his body and had a caretaker who took notes for him. His outward appearance was no indication of his intelligence, wit, and humor though. The guy was sharp as a tack and funnier than hell. We became great buds that semester. Anyway, in one class we had a very old school professor that ran the class like an angry Catholic nun. In addition to this, the professor constantly treated my buddy as if he was mentally disabled just because he was in a wheelchair. But rather than taking direct offense to the professor's condescending attitude, my buddy saw it as an opportunity to flip the script and just played into it by randomly yelling out, "Tim A" every 15 minutes or so. All semester long. It never didn't get a laugh, and the professor would be seething by the end of every class session with zero recourse. Partied with a similar dude, a college grad but wheelchair bound because of childhood injury, who had some vocalizations. But he could communicate better with a text-to-speech computer that looked like a keyboard, just before smartphone tablet era. Dude would get hammered drunk, sipping drink via a straw, and then start screwing up his keyboard input so the computer voice would mess up. Imagine a computer voice like from Stephen Hawking but gone drunk and wonky. He was a hoot.